Welcome to Missionary Roundtable with your host, Kale Horvath.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Missionary Roundtable, the podcast all about the Great Commission and international missions. Today we've got a regular returning guest. I try to do an episode with him every year on every season because he's a man who doesn't need an introduction in my life or on this podcast. Jeff Bartel, former senior pastor at First Baptist Church, current missionary pastor, also former 14-year missionary to the country of Albania. He's meant a lot to me in my life. He has discipled me in ministry, taught me how to be a missionary. He taught me how to preach. And he is one of, there's only so many guys in my life that I know were missionaries who did it and did it successfully. Their ministries are still existent and thriving and growing. I only have a few such men in my life. And so to be able to, talk to Jeff at any time is always a privilege. So I won't take too much time. I'm excited for you guys to listen to this one. Not just about missions, but a lot of ministry behind the scenes stuff here. I think you'll like it. So have a listen. Enjoy. Jeff, thanks again, man, for joining me. You've been a regular every season. Maybe it has to do with because we know each other, but I appreciate being able to exploit our previous relationship for a free podcast episode every season.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you inviting me. I hope it's not just because you have a limited list of friends. I'm not sure how that works out, but I'm glad to be
it's part of it. It's part of it. Yeah. Is it because you're interesting or is it because, well, we've exhausted the options? Let's get
Jeff down at the bottom of the bucket. Yeah.
No, but seriously, at the recording of this episode, because I don't know when it'll come out in the summer, I was just in Albania with you a couple weeks ago. And since we left for the field at the end of 2020, it's not like we get to hang out very often. That was the second time that I've seen you in person. So that was fun. Right. But I was in Albania because you guys were celebrating 30 years of ministry in Albania since you went there in 92, I believe.
92, yeah, that would be 30 years ago.
To start the first church. And so since then, well, you tell it. There's 3 churches. They're planning a 4th, I believe.
Yeah, so the ministry has really grown and expanded, praise the Lord. So I went in 1992 on my own. I was a bachelor, as the story went. I might have shared this before. Married my translator, my wife now, had a couple of kids, raised a family there, lived there for 14 years until 2006. When I left, we had successfully planted a second church. So we had 2 churches by the time I left. Since I've been gone, the 16 years since I've been gone, the pastor has continued. The guy that was my assistant, Talnat Kretsi is his name, continues. So he's been pastor there longer than I was, which is cool.
That's crazy, isn't it? Well, you've been in the States now longer than you were in Albania.
Yeah, now longer than I was in Albania. That hurts my feelings a little. But it's cool. And anyways, they have since ordained and started a 3rd church. The second church in Durrës, Albania, where I was a part of that, Sazan's church, they are in the process of planting another church, which would be the 4th one. In the meantime, they also ordained and sent an Albanian national and his family as a missionary to the country of Turkey. So actually, that's the 5th ministry, independent ministry. Past year.
Is that okay?
Yeah, when I was saying his name.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just an Albanian guy. Okay. Who's in Turkey.
So There's a lot of those. If I need to. No, that's cool. All right.
Yeah, no, they won't hunt him down. All right. And his initials are no, I'm not gonna. It doesn't matter. In the last year, my brother-in-law and his wife have taken on an enormous project of translating the Bible into the Albanian language. That's a whole nother conversation. But
I just interviewed Arion on it as an update for it. So
okay, well, great. So that'll be covered of its own.
And then Martin.
And now
I just interviewed him too. So we got Albanians.
Oh, you got a lot of these various things covered.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of great things. So by the time you add them all up, there's 3 churches, a 4th one, a missionary, a Bible translator, and a brand new initiated guy about to start a new mission in Kosovo. So that's 7 independent ministries
Amen.
That have branched out from what we began in the former atheist little black hole of gospel witness, the country of Albania in 1992. So.
Well, and so we just said that you've been in the States now longer than you were in Albania, 14 years in Albania, 16 years now in the States.
Yeah.
And so what was it like? Now, you go back almost every year. So, I mean, you're going back preaching conferences or just seeing family and friends. But what was it like for you? I asked Martine this question, but different perspectives. What was it like for you as the Paul to this ministry, the father of the ministry, now that you've been gone for so long, but to come back, not see for the first, it's been thriving, but to see where they're at now, all those years later, even after you've been long gone, what was that like just emotionally for you? What was going through your head when you were just at that celebration, taking it all in?
Yeah, well, it's just
that's
very
the goal
rewarding.
for a missionary, right? I mean, it's like if the Lord tarries in 30 years, that's what I want. It's continuing, fruit that remains.
Absolutely. The Albanian brothers and sisters are just obviously some of the dearest, closest friends that I have in the world. They're the kindest people. I love them to death. They are my family. They have always treated me with more honor and respect. And I say this and I mean it, than I deserve. They've always, just given me so much love, and every time I've gone back, and I've averaged going back once every year. Sometimes I've gone a couple times a year. In COVID, I missed a little bit there, but about a time. I've been at least 16 times in the last 16 years. And so I'm aware of how they're doing. But, in 16 years, like all the families that had newborn babies, they're teenagers graduating high school now, and they got a whole slew of new kids. In other words, in the past, year by year, when I would go back and visit, the feel of it was different, because back then it was much more about, hey, Jeff's back. And there would be, sounds weird for me to say it, but it's true. There would be this long line of people, like after a Sunday morning service or something, that would be waiting to just greet me and say, hey, and,
it
at least
been
just
that long since you had left.
Yeah. But this time, man, it was really weird. I mean, it's slowly this change has been happening, and I count it as joy. I do. The line of people waiting to talk to me is shortening, which means there is vibrant life that has nothing to do with me anymore.
New people
and I think that's
they only
exciting.
know you by name. Sure.
Yeah, Grandpa Jeff, I've heard about him, whatever. That's the guy. Oh, the American. His Albanian's pretty good. He's got a funny accent, whatever. Okay. He seems nice. Other people are talking to him. I'm not going to wait.
Gotcha.
I don't have, there's an ever-growing list of people I don't really know. I don't have relationships with. That wasn't the case early on. Everybody I went back, I knew everybody. I saw everybody. I could catch up with everybody. They've moved on and are serving the Lord how they're doing it in various ways that obviously I'm not directly involved with. So to me, truly, at this stage of my life, it's a joy. It's a huge joy. You know me, I have a hard time receiving a lot of focus and attention and compliments and all that stuff. It just hits me weird. I have a hard time when they're that overly nice and kind and honoring. And so if I were allowed to just kind of sit in the corner and smile, seeing what God's doing, and they'd leave me the heck alone, I would like that. Now that's never going to fully happen, because they're always going to treat me great, and make me get up and say something with a microphone or whatever. But it sure is trending that way. There's less and less people worrying about who I am, and I just dig it. I think it's fantastic.
That's cool.
And just to the things that they're doing now through their church expansions, I have nothing to do with any of it.
Yeah.
The fact that I can just think that having initiated the beginning of it impacted the continuation, man, well, praise the Lord.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I could even see the first time I went was with you in 2015, I think. It was a while ago now. And I've been there a few times. I think this was my 4th time, because I've been there twice this year, actually. I mean, It's a shorter flight for
That's
me,
funny.
man. I just got to fly
Yeah, it's
over
way
Serbia.
closer now.
It's an hour.
They need to call you for those conferences now. I'm
Yeah.
tired of making that long trip. I'm
It's-
getting
it's-
older. I'm
It's an
sick of
hour flight
flying.
over the mountains of Serbia. It's not too bad if you can get the direct flight. So I've told Cezanne and those guys, like, no, I'm going to make it a point to visit you guys more because it's really not that hard for me to get here. I could
Yeah,
be there
you could
every
literally
weekend,
do
but,
a
you know,
weekend or
once,
whatever,
twice
yeah.
a year for sure. I've already done it twice this year. But I've even like met new people that, you know, when I've always asked them when someone comes up to me, I don't know, like, okay, so when did you start coming? And it was always like, oh, you know, in 2004 or something, you know. But dude, this past trip, I met people in the Tirana church. It was like, oh, you know, 2017, 2018. And I'm like, oh, so
Right.
I actually don't know you. I'm used to people saying, "Oh yeah, no, I met you. I saw you
I
back
remember when you came the first
yeah,
time.
and
Yes.
you were 24 or whatever." Like but now it's like, "Oh, I actually don't know you and you don't know me and you're just introducing yourself." That's really cool. That's really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very, I mean, it was a special celebration, the 30-year thing, because
course.
although, as you know, it was kind of a marathon and not understanding the language, I sympathize with you enduring like that 3-hour
I didn't sit in the chair the whole time.
deal.
No, I was in and out.
It would have been
was
horrible.
chatting with people.
That had been really
not
tough.
all of your people were in there the whole time. They were going in and out.
Oh, I know. The place was packed.
it was awesome,
hot
yeah.
in there. But they tried to do a concise summary. And this is what I appreciated about it. It was not about, you know, what did Jeff do or what did anybody do? It really was, what has the Lord done?
Yeah. Well, you can tell that
it really
in the
was
video
a celebration
that they
of
played too.
what
Just
the Lord has done.
slideshow. Yeah.
And so, you know, that was a joy for me.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it was a joy because I got to be a part of it. The very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like you are now. You're trying to start something from the very beginning, and so on the front end, there's dark days. It's hard.
Sure.
It's lonely, but you know, you got to stick to it. And you got to do it right. You got to build the foundation right. And you got to make sure the doctrine is right, so that when you get generations outward, you know, they're not straying into, you know, crazy land.
Yeah.
And stuff
You
like that.
have
So
to
these guys
spend
are
time
doing
on the
good.
foundation. I was just telling, I think it was Will. I think it was Will Lyon. I was doing an interview with, and we were talking about, you know, I was asking him about those foundational years and how things just seem like they're moving too slow. But like, remember when we built the Next Gen Center at FBC, and it like took forever to get that project off the ground, from planning to, you know, prepping the land, testing the land. Even we'd come drill holes and see, you know, how if the dirt was good
Right.
enough, which is a great biblical parallel that, you know, preachers shouldn't start talking about. But, you know, then, you know, excavating, digging, pouring the footers, that takes so long. But then once the footers were in and they started putting the poles up, it went up fast.
It started going.
So it's like you got to spend the time, man. And that's what I keep reminding myself as we continue to just press on, nose to the grindstone, is like, you have to get the foundation right. It doesn't actually
people
matter
are
how long
watching
it
you.
takes.
It's not even just the fact that you're teaching the people sound doctrine and right principles. It's also just how you're living your life in the midst of the challenges you're living through. And they're watching you do it.
Yeah.
Because they're also making value judgments on your living out of what you're saying you believe.
Sure.
As to whether or not you really mean it may have a huge impact on whether they decide if they're going to really mean it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I'll share this briefly only because it's public. We shared it in a prayer newsletter. But wife is pregnant right now, praise God. But we did have a miscarriage earlier in the year. First time for us, and it was a little rough and unexpected because it was I forget the name of it, but it's like a lost twin syndrome kind of thing. You have twins and you lose one, but we didn't know we had twins, so we like found out in the same breath that you have twins, but you lost one, and that was hard. It was a whirlwind of emotions because like you're grieving, but you're also there's still a baby in there, and so you're not as sad as maybe you should be, and then you're like, you feel guilty. It's like, maybe I should be more sad. So it was just a weird thing. And so what did we do? We don't have a church family here yet. Of course, we contacted our friends in our church back home to pray. But you know what we do have? We've got a few saved people, and we've got plenty of friends here that we hang out with all the time. So we texted them, hey, this is what happened. Would you pray for us? And dude, we have people who don't know the Lord, who are like you said, just watching how a Christian grieves and reacts to storms in life, and then they're like, man, I don't know how to pray, but I'm trying, I'm praying for you and the baby, and it's already been awesome to see God work
Yeah,
all
that's a
things
sweet
together.
side effect of a tough
Yeah,
situation.
you
But
don't
you're
wish
right. If
for it,
you'll
but
live,
God uses it.
if you'll live your life kind of within reason, openly,
Hmm.
and let others in, let the people in where you live, let them help you.
Yeah.
Let them be the ones that help you when you have a real need or whatever it might be, whether it's emotional, like you just mentioned, or it could be at some point, it could be physical or financial or
Well,
even
and it
whatever. I
was
mean, who
physical for
knows?
a second too, because whenever it happened, we didn't know what was happening yet. But the
Right.
doctor was like, "You need to be on bed rest for 10 days. Like, don't get up." And Brooke's like, "Well, I can
Right.
like walk and take my son to school." No, and I was like, "Uh, what?"
No,
I
that
still
bed
have to
rest
work and
stuff is
stuff. So
serious.
it was a crazy 2 weeks. But then one of the sweet girls who's one of Brooke's best friends. She's a younger girl, like I think she's 20 now, and she's like immediately, "Hey, I'm coming over tomorrow. I'm gonna make you dinner. I'm gonna help you with the laundry so Kale doesn't have to do the laundry." I mean, it was just like we
Right.
have real friendships here that and it's yeah,
That's a huge impact. Yeah. Well, praise the Lord that some good can come out of that. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Obviously, that
amen.
was a tough situation for your family, but I can only imagine. It hasn't ever happened to me, but obviously, as a pastor, you counsel a lot of people. But yeah, the bittersweet reaction that had to have been that. While you want to grieve, am I grieving not enough? But at the same time, I don't want to diminish that I actually have joy because we still have a life growing.
Yeah, it's a strange
And
balance.
yeah,
You're in a straight betwixt two, but the
yeah.
probably the coolest thing that was said before I move on is that so Brooke, of the two of us, you think Brooke would be the most broken up, but she just had this really deep thought that it isn't that deep, but it was just it's what I needed to hear at the time, and she said something to the effect of God's in the business of bringing life from death, and if any of our lost friends get saved because of this baby going home to be with the Lord, then it's worth it, and so to hear her say
Yeah.
that was like such a
Wow.
huge thing for me.
That's a very mature statement. That's a
Yeah,
tough thing
yeah,
for a
man. I mean,
mom who just experienced it. Yeah, yeah.
she definitely
No
made me
doubt.
feel convicted, but no, man, seriously,
Yeah.
that's we've been seeing good things. So, what I would like to talk about for a little bit here is that a super interesting part of your story now is that as of today, as of beginning of this year, I think you are no longer the senior pastor at FBC.
I am no longer the senior pastor at First Baptist Church in New Philadelphia,
Which,
Ohio. That's true.
which
That's
when was that
actually
official?
that's a year old. That was back at like
Seriously?
the end of
How long have you been gone?
April of last year. So yeah, you're a little out of touch, man.
Really? April of last
Um,
year?
yeah, it was
Dang.
the end of
Okay.
April is when the vote was. It was
Official.
probably a few
It's been a
weeks
long time in the
ago. Well, it's
making,
been a
right?
month or so ago. We actually announced that, Troy had been officially voted in a year ago.
Wow. Wow.
It was when I was sick. I was in the hospital when all
And
that
that was
went
last
went
spring.
down.
You're right. Okay.
So it was, yeah, last April is when I had the surgery that kind of went south and I had some trouble there.
Hmm.
And during that time, we had just made the announcement that I'm resigning, and Troy was the guy that they need to vote for. And
Hmm.
we gave them a few weeks to pray, and they voted. And so by the end of April, around the 1st of May, they voted him in. So it's been over a year. He's got a solid year in now, which means I've got a solid year into my new job description. Although the first
But
couple of months I was almost on bed rest recovering from
yeah,
that
for
whole
sure.
health
That crazy
ordeal.
health thing.
So it wasn't until the summer, in the middle or later of the summer. So I'm looking down almost a year of
Well, and that's what I
exercising
want to
some
start
new
with. For those
responsibilities.
who are, maybe not in our fellowship listening or in our fellowship, but are like, well, I didn't even know you weren't the pastor there. They don't, not everybody tracks New Philly,
Yeah, why
news,
would they?
keeps up on the New Philly updates.
Great metropolis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. But it's kind of weird when a senior pastor resigns and doesn't leave. You don't see that too
Doesn't
often.
leave. I ain't
So,
leaving.
what
I'm
I would
quitting. I
love you
ain't
to do,
leaving.
right, right, exactly, because you're gonna stay and micromanage, right? That was.
Yeah.
But so
Yeah. Who
seriously
wants
though,
that?
if you could back up a little bit and explain this move or what God was doing in your heart, your life, and Troy, of course, what was God doing in your heart and your life, and even maybe your vision for FBC that made you start considering this move?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's kind of interesting because it ends up tying into what you previously asked me about with my little 30-year celebration in Albania, I was asked to, do my part of the summarizing of the early years.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was constructing that little conversation, I was reminded to emphasize to the church there that I've always tried to live with a certain principle, ministry principle in my life. And it goes something like this.
This is gonna be good. Get your pens and get your pencils out, man. This is it.
Yeah, this is the gold dripping from the lips of former senior pastor. Okay, whatever. No, I only do what only you can do. That's just kind of been a principle that's guided what I have chosen to do with my life and ministry. So in other words, whatever I'm involved in needs to be something that I'm uniquely qualified. Now, it's a great big world. A lot of people can do a lot of things.
Sure.
But in my, in the little bubble of the world you live in your little corner of the world, I want to be uniquely qualified to do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I was coming up through my 20s and being trained and groomed in Decatur Baptist Church in North Alabama back in the day.
Don't say groomed. It has a negative connotation nowadays. You gotta.
Oh, sorry. I'm out of touch.
Sorry.
As I was being prepared for
jokes.
ministry. Yeah, no, it's all good. Younger people can laugh. I won't even know why. It's okay. So the idea is that, I was teaching middle school ministry as a layman, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And then the missionary thing, I was really on my heart. Make a long story short, when Albania opportunity popped up, I was like, well, of course I need to do that. Anybody here at the church could replace me and do middle school ministry. It's not like it's that difficult. As long as, so I had other guys that worked with me on our ministry team.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those guys just stepped up and took the lead. No problem at all. It was seamless. So I go to Albania. Why? Because nobody's going to Albania.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then devoted the significant portion of my young adult, energetic, ministry life
mm-hmm.
to doing what we previously discussed. And so why did I leave Albania? Well, I left Albania because by the early 2000s, it was becoming apparent that the Albanian men that we were working with and trained and ordaining and setting in place, and that they were fully capable of doing all the things I was doing. So I began to work towards them actually fully understanding how to handle all the responsibilities that I had as a senior pastor there in Tirana. And when it became obvious that every level of quality, not just, Bible exposition and teaching, but we had discipleship and Bible school and, institute training and all of the various outreaches
how to administrate all of that,
annual conferences and inviting people and hosting and running all these kind of things. These guys were doing it all. And I realized that, as we so often say with missions, I would say that the goal is to work yourself out of a job, get other people to do what you can do, and then you go do it somewhere else. Now, the model of how you choose to do that, that's up to you. I'm not trying to
I was going to ask you, if
details.
You don't mind, did you consider staying and moving to a different city at all and going to plant another church? Was that a process, or did God make it pretty
consideration?
Clear? Okay.
It was a consideration. So there were three basic options without boring anybody with the details.
Well, because you didn't move back to the States to pastor FBC. Some people might just think that, but there was like a year or two in between you moving back. It wasn't like you moved back to the States so that you could be the pastor of First Baptist. Yeah,
I wasn't offered that job or anything. I didn't leave to come back and take that job or anything. Mm-hmm. No, so for me, there were three options. Either the only thing that wasn't an option was kind of what I'm doing now: stay in Tirana and stay in the church that I just resigned from. I couldn't do that.
The Albanian pastor needed to take the reins, and you needed to step out.
And the church needed to give him that freedom.
Mm.
If I was, as the initiating founding pastor, if I'm sitting in the back row,
that's a little different than just a former senior pastor.
Whatever decision he would make, the whole church would look over their shoulder like, yeah, but what does Jeff think?
Gotcha.
That's not the case at First Baptist here at this point, for sure. Anyways, back then, the only thing I couldn't do was stay in Tirana. But I could have gone to another city and started something new. So I could have stayed in Albania. I could have moved to a different country that has Albanians. The bordering countries around Albania, like Kosovo,
like Martinique,
has Albanians. Mm-hmm. So that's an option. That was something we considered. There was another option to move to a different, more major European city, like Budapest, for example, which is a good modern it's Eastern Europe, but it's modern.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could use it as a ministry hub. A lot of large independent ministry organizations have base
Sure.
in Budapest.
Mm-hmm.
So, somewhere like that, or somewhere in Germany or England or whatever, didn't stay on the continent, but, manage some ministry function. That didn't seem to make sense. Or go back to the States and still support the Albanian ministry from here in whatever fashion, and do something else. At the end of the day, we chose to come back to the States. We went to the Atlanta area mainly for the idea to be involved in church planting. I've always been interested in seeing new churches started. I never wanted to take just the role of a leader of an existing church. Ironically, that's what I ended up doing. But I was in Atlanta for about 2.5 years before the opportunity in New Philadelphia called me, and they asked me if I would consider it, and I actually told them, I'm not interested. I'll talk to you. I'll help you find the right guy, but I'm not interested. Anyways, God had a different plan, and I came here. Okay, well, let's circle back to the whole first question you asked me is, why?
Yeah.
Well, the principle of only do what only you can do. I mean, it's not like somebody else couldn't have pastored this church.
But there were a lot of
without a
fires to put
pastor
out
for about a year.
Yeah,
there were some very right. There was a lot of there was turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
There was some trouble, and
our church had been without a pastor for a year or two at that point. So if any church goes through that, it's not easy to go without a senior pastor for a year.
So they definitely needed somebody who could come in and handle, that challenge. And I didn't desire it. It wasn't all wonderful.
You're not like, all right, I'll take it on. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been called, a fighter at times. I guess I get into scraps with people from time to time, but it's never, who likes it? Like,
right.
I'm never going to pick a fight. I'm hopefully never going to run from one. I mean, but I'm not going to pick a fight. Like, who wants to live like that? I'm going to live in peace and harmony too. Mm-hmm. Anyway, there was some real needs for some strong leadership to come in and make some decisions, some hard decisions, and to keep this church pointed in the direction that historically always had. And that was sound biblical doctrine and discipleship and strategy of ministry and philosophy of training and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So there was a very unique slot where I saw my experience matching the need that I could jump in and do it. And so I chose to do it. And praise the Lord, we went through some tough times, but man, God has blessed this church and done some great things. And we got a lot of things lined out, and it's very healthy. It got very healthy, and the church was doing great. And people are growing, and, ministries are flourishing, and all these things are happening. And I just started thinking that, okay, well, now that it's going great, maybe somebody else who's actually better at, certainly skilled at expository preaching. So we found the right guy for sure, but much better at, the administrative and even vision casting. I don't know, but the details of continuing to push forward an existing healthy church to grow even further. I just felt like that's not what I need to be doing. That's not, I've done what I came here to do. Now let me go do something else that currently is weak and could use some more work and more attention. And so our idea, Troy and I together, was that he would take over the role as the senior pastor. And it's a longer story, but at the end of the day, I was willing to leave, because who wants the old senior pastor hanging around and making it weird for everybody? I was willing to move on. And actually, he pitched for me to stay. Would you be willing to stay and do what you want to do here? Why do you have to leave? It would be a great help to me if you would hang around. And I was honored that he even said that, and began to seriously, at the beginning, I didn't even have that in my plan, because I didn't want to get in his way, kind of like I did with Taulant and Tirana. And so I began to prayerfully consider that, and it really made sense that could work great. And it only works great because, well, Troy's such a great guy, and he's not intimidated, and I'm not going to get in his way, Lord knows. And
well, you've been doing
so
this
far,
long
again,
enough, you know
how
and
to a year
not
down
get
the road,
in that way. Yeah.
I'd say that we're doing great. I think so. If there's trouble out there, I'm unaware of it. I think it's going great.
Well, and that actually leads me to the next question I had. Was just, okay, so what is your job now? What is I know it's, first year, kind of evolving and finding yourself, but what is the plan and what you desire to do?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm learning how to flesh it out best and balance my new, responsibilities. But given a title, typically I'm referred to as the missions pastor, which, again, as an old missionary guy,
default.
But it's just the joy of my life.
Sure.
Like it's the heartbeat of my soul. I just love missions and being able to facilitate seeing guys like you get mobilized.
Mm-hmm.
And even more. And so
we've got some guys in the chute back there at FBC too.
We do. And so part and parcel of that is also, the extended higher levels of Bible training. And so, we do an in-house version of our own Bible Institute. Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to do that. And we've cooperated with other churches, and that's been great. And that's been a great blessing to First Baptist Church. Mm-hmm. But the more that we can teach directly ourselves as pastors of this church to our people, I just think it's better. And Troy agrees. And so what we want to do is be able to do more of that. But as the senior pastor preparing and studying every week, it's almost impossible. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to run a Bible Institute out of your church if you don't have somebody dedicated to that, mm-hmm. leading that effort at least. And so that's a big part of what I do as well, is heading up the higher level Bible training education. So missions and education are my main two.
Missions and leadership training for...
Yeah, so you're taking the guys who already have been responding well to discipleship. Right. They're involved in ministry, but they want more. They're dreaming. Yeah. They want to be a missionary. They want to be a pastor. They want to be sent out someday. What do I have to do? Well, now I've got 30 years of experience in doing it in various levels as a stateside senior pastor, as a field church planning pioneer, missionary type guy. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've kind of seen various sides of the coin. And I've learned some things along the way, so I can kind of be a mentor and a coach and develop the strategic structure of how we're going to get these guys in and out of here and successfully planted to start new things in other places. And when I was preaching every Sunday, I could never pull that off. Sure. And because of my missions background, this is not the job description that would best suit Troy, for example. Why didn't I just stay the senior pastor and let Troy do this? Mm-hmm. Well, because of my missions background. That's why. Mm-hmm. And I'm older. I mean, Troy's younger. He's got more energy to handle the daily stresses of running. And I think it's better for the church. It is. Troy's a solid decade younger than I am. I mean, it's better for the church.
What is better for the body? Sure. And not in a bad way, not in a negative way, but I have heard you say this before, that there are some guys who they duck out or they retire or whatever way past when they should have. Now, whether that, we're not reading into it, it's an individual basis. Did they do it for the money? Did they do it? Because, most pastors don't have a lot of money. It's like maybe they need it, the income. But it's like, man, it's kind of like, you remember the Brett Favre thing way back in the day? I know Brett Favre's kind of old now, but it's like he retired, unretired, retired, unretired. It's like he ended up doing stints in New York and Minnesota. And it's like, my guy, this would have been a lot better if you would have just went out on top with Green Bay. So I feel like money, it's a little bit of self-awareness too, that it's not like there's nothing left in the tank, but as the senior pastor, it's like, could I do this for another 5 more years? Sure. But I think that's interesting that you were trying to look out, not just what's best for you, but what is best for the body.
Listen, it's been said, I don't know how accurate it is, but it tends to make good common sense that any individual and their method of communication. So the senior pastor is the primary Bible communicator every week, right? Mm-hmm. So typically your method of construction of messages and the way you communicate them and the way you think through the logical progression of stuff, face it, it's going to speak more to the people who are closer to your age. Typically they'll
sense.
say for a senior pastor that you're going to communicate more effectively to people who are about 20 years younger or older than you. That's your bracket. So if you go 20 down and 20 up, those are the people who are really going to relate to what it is you're saying. You go beyond that, and it's just harder
I didn't know that.
for the people to really connect. So, so now I'm 60.
I mean,
so
that's why we typically don't have 50-year-old youth pastors, though. I mean, to be fair.
Yeah. So if you go 60, well, that's 40 to 80. If you go 50, that's 30 to 70. That's your adult population.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Again, this is not a rule for anybody else. This is just the stuff that I process. I'm not trying to, judge anybody else's choice, but I just felt like it was better for the church. I felt like it was the right thing for me in my life. And I just thought it was strategic also because, again, what is your identity? This was actually an issue, Kale, that I wrestled with that I probably haven't ever talked about before. So you wouldn't even know to ask me.
Breaking news.
But once again, don't get the pencils out or nothing, but whatever.
You heard it here, folks, on Missionary Roundtable.
What is your identity in Christ tied to? In other words, is it tied to the job title that you have? Like if you're a senior pastor, that's in our world of really emphasizing the importance of a local church that's not a part of some hierarchy organization, some
that's
denominational organization, that it's the top. You've reached it. And if it's been a successful church, if it's been a church that is spiritually walking with the Lord and has people that are growing and has resources to reach out and affect other areas of the world, et cetera, well, it just doesn't get any better than that. Like to do anything else, some guys might judge as like backsliding or whatever. Or you could judge it the way I judge it. And that is that, look, a role is just a role. I mean, you fulfill a role. You do whatever it is you think the Lord has for you to do to have influence with people, to make the best of your skill set, opportunity, need. The Lord calls you to a work, not to a title, not to a location. We talk about that in missions, Acts 13, stuff like that. He calls you to do a specific work. There was a work that needed to be done to complement the picture of what we're trying to do at First Baptist Church, and somebody needed to do it. I saw that I could do it best by not having the weekly responsibility of being the primary leader of this church body. And thank the Lord, he brought Troy along to be a part of our team to be able to take that responsibility in a very seamless, smooth manner. Troy can easily make his own executive decisions to turn and make changes as he sees fit, and I'll be the first one to support him in it. That's fine, but there's a work that needs to continue to go on, and if the job description is different, and now I'm sitting here talking to you in my new office is way smaller than my old office.
And it's in the back by the bathrooms too, so.
That's where I'm located. Short of being adjacent to the bathroom, the rest of those circumstances are actually really great. I love being in the back of the office. It's real quiet. Everybody leaves me alone. I can study a lot, whatever. It's fun. But again, I don't care about the size of my office. I don't care.
But there are guys who do.
About the size of my paycheck. I don't care about the job title on my business cards. I don't care about those things. I want to be effective for the Lord in whatever role that is. And I've tried to prove that through my life in various ways, and this is just the next step. So
that's cool,
it is unusual for a guy to step down from being the senior pastor and stick around. And there's a lot of good reasons why he probably shouldn't stick around. In our situation, it just works out good. And until something changes, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I will say this, dude, because I want to, that's a great transition into the other thing that I want to talk about before our time is up. But I will say that, so when you came, there were a lot of fires that needed to be put out because our church was without a pastor for so long, and just things that come with that. Long time ago, doesn't matter now, but there was just a lot of stuff that took a long time to figure out, get through, recover from. I mean, it just took a while to get through them, but there are a lot of obvious things that I think we can look at and see that, like, God used Jeff to do this at FBC. But as a lifer, if anyone's listening, like, I grew up in that church. I was born there, nursery all the way up to being sent out when I was 30. And so like that church isn't just my sending church. That's my family. Like it means a lot to me. And so Pastor Mark Trotter, the late Mark Trotter, was my pastor from a child up until I was about 16 or 17. And then when he left, there was about a year gap, and then Jeff came when I was about 18 or so, 18 or 19. And so my childhood pastor was Mark Trotter, and my adulthood pastor was you. And when I look at the things that Mark did great and our church was centered on, and Mark did huge things for our church too. He was there a long time, and there were things that I've been told, because I wasn't around, but I've been told by older guys that Mark came and the passion that he had for the book. Guys like Frank Perdue were there back then too, bringing discipleship in the 90s. There were key things that God used Mark Trotter to do in our church at that time, even though FBC is 160 some years old and has been by the book since the beginning. But there are things that God used you to do too that weren't just putting out fires. And one of the big things that I see as a lifer was our church began to look at missions differently because you were the former missionary. Now, we did missions and we gave to missions and we sent out missionaries, but we didn't always know what we were doing. And that's coming from a kid who was just watching. I wasn't an adult back then. But just looking, and I don't know that I would have become a missionary or considered it if you wouldn't have come to our church. And I'm not saying that just to blow smoke at you, because, we don't do that. Like you and I mean, we're not guys that just give out random compliments. But seriously, man, I wanted to be a pastor since I was 16. I tell people that all the time. Before you came, I wanted to be a pastor. And when you came, I remember asking, I was a nobody. I was just a kid. And I remember, I don't know when or where, I just remember telling you, hey, I'm one of the guys who would like to be a pastor someday. What should I do? There used to be this thing called shepherd school. Now there's nothing. And you're like, you told me you're just going to have to be patient. We'll get there, I promise. And so I was. But I never considered missions. I always just wanted to be a pastor. And so your passion for missions and your experience and it doesn't matter, because missions was your life for so long. When you took over this church, that was part of your identity, and it became a part of our identity. And so you brought in more missionaries. We started supporting more missions and started doing more in strategic ways. And seriously, I mean, I think God brought you to FBC for many reasons, but one of which was I think it was helping me to find what God wanted me to do. So that was a long rant to say thank you.
Praise the Lord for that.
And there's other guys in our church that are in the chute that I'm sure would say the same thing.
Absolutely. And we're excited for the day that, that they actually get out the door and land in their new location and all that sort of thing. Yeah. But for sure, guys that are dreaming that way, look, certainly First Baptist Church had done a lot for world evangelism long before I showed up. But you're right. There's just something different about having somebody with some firsthand knowledge to be able to explain things that way. I don't blame American pastors for not understanding foreign missions that well.
You can't know unless you've done it. That's what I've learned.
There's just some things, I mean, you can be sympathetic, and there are some very unique American pastors who really have worked at being very understanding. I have some friends who are in that category, but it's not the norm. Normally, American pastors have American pastoral mindset, and they're all about the gospel and ministry, and they're about funding and holding people accountable and doing certain, and they're good things. But the real understanding of what day-to-day life is like, you just need to open a window on that to people. You have to be able to expose them to what the reality really is. And to me, it was the idea of demystifying it. Because the typical American thinks, wow, those missionaries, those guys are, either they think that missionaries are really special, like God really blessed you. You got an extra spiritual chromosome that other people didn't get, or so that you could do, or they just think you're
weird,
biggest loser doofuses ever, that you couldn't handle life in the U.S., which is sometimes a fair accusation.
But you know what, though, dude, you obviously brought the experience, but also just from me watching you from afar, because missions was a part of your identity, it just was always coming out of you. Like, you didn't preach a message where missions didn't come out somehow. And I never went to a missions conference until you came to our church and you're like, we're going to have an annual missions conference because it's that important. So it was like, just because it was such a big part of your life as a former missionary, our church started to become more, not just aware, but like it was brought to the forefront.
Well, bringing
on a daily
missionaries
basis.
in, having a conference, the beauty is bringing the guys in from other fields that you may or may not yet be supporting financially, so that the church body can get to know them just as brothers and sisters in Christ.
Mm.
So you mentioned Will Lyon, for example. We brought Will in. You got to meet him. You got to know him. Now he's your buddy.
Right.
Well, you'd have never known Will if we didn't have a conference to invite him to. And you could hang out together and go to a coffee shop and chat about life and all that kind of stuff. In other words, people in our church have been transformed. So I think the church members need to go on mission trips, if at all possible, if they can physically make it and if they can financially do it. At some point in their life, they need to go on a short-term mission trip and just lift up your eyes and look on the fields. They're white already unto harvest. And you need to lift up your eyes and look on the fields. And sometimes people can't leave to go do that. So the best we can, we help them look on the fields at least 1 week of the year. When we bring the fields we spend a little money and fly these people in and bring them to our church and let them tell their stories and show their pictures, and mostly schedule time when our people can just hang out with them and sit around and chat and get to know them a little better and have dinner together and that sort of thing. And that begins to change your perspective. Like, wait a minute, these are just regular dudes who just made an executive decision that I'm going to go do this over here with people who've never heard before. And then you start dreaming. You started thinking about it. Other guys start thinking about it.
Well, and because,
before you know it,
when you don't know what missions is and you've never been on a trip, you assume that missions is, like you said, kind of mystical, and so you have to demystify it. But when I realized that like missions is just being a pastor somewhere else, like there's a lot more to it. I get that. There's a lot of things that I have to do that, sometimes we say half the job of being a missionary is just staying on the field because there's so many governmental hoops to jump through and money and support.
Daily life is way harder.
But really, I'm a pastor here now. And so I'm a pastor in Hungary. We got to start the church, but I was a pastor in America, and then God asked me to go do that over here. And so when I realized that, I was like, oh, well, I want to be a pastor. Well, maybe I could do that somewhere else too someday. And that's when the burden was given.
Well, that's just the basis of your whole view of missions and missiology. In other words, what is missions? I mean, it's so weird to me.
Well, that's
to
true.
think
There could be a lot of debate about that statement
it's
I just
so
made.
Weird, right? People think that, if you understand missions properly, then you understand that it's just making disciples and starting churches all over the world. That's all it is. It's just doing what we do here, just do it somewhere else. And whether that's, across the state. So, we started a new church in Columbus, Ohio. Well, okay. It just happens to be English speaking. It's just only a couple hours down the road. We're starting a church in Budapest, Hungary. It's going to cost a little more. It's going to be more of a sacrifice for you, for sure. But the point is what are we doing? We're just making disciples and we're starting churches. That's all we're doing. However, that's not the mindset of a lot of people. A lot of people are like, oh no, well, I'm going to be I don't know, whatever.
Fill in the blank missionary. I've heard some.
Like I'm going to start.
Magician
a
missionary
restaurant.
is the weirdest one that I ever heard. I love magic. I love magicians. I'm into that. I think it's cool. Magician missionary. That's weird. Sorry.
Look, all these people that are missionaries and they don't forget that they don't start churches. This is what blew me away when I got to Albania and I started seeing all these people that called themselves missionaries. Not just that they didn't attempt to start churches. A lot of them didn't go to a church.
Oof.
It was the weirdest thing ever. And so you get all these people.
Well, you got to do one of the two. You got to either go to church or start a church so that you can go to that one. Like you can't not do either.
Oh, there's people that don't do either.
Hey.
That's for sure. But I don't know what they tell their supporters. I don't know. It's none of my business. I don't care. It bothers me, but it's, whatever. At the end of the day, look, I'm doing humanitarian work. I'm a missionary. Okay, well, there's places that need humanitarian aid, and that's fine. And maybe that is your day job. As long as you are plugged into a church and making disciples also, like it goes back to your missiology. When you have that right missiology, like obviously you do, because we taught you right, you see it in the scriptures. That's all Paul did.
Yeah.
They made disciples and started churches and ordained elders and commended them to the Lord, Acts 14. That's what they did. Well, then that's what you do. So then you're right. You do bottom line it. It does become easier. You start realizing, oh, I'm just a pastor. I was a pastor at home. I'm I'm gonna relocate and be a pastor.
There's some new things you got to learn on the way, of course, but
it's harder because in a lot of cases, now I have to learn how to live in a different culture. I got to learn to speak a new language.
Sure.
It takes more time. It takes more commitment. That's why I think the Lord not only gives you more grace, but he also has some very special rewards for people who are willing to do it. Nevertheless, that's all it is. You're just making disciples, all nations. It's just not that. How many times have we said this over and over again in our churches, and people still don't get it? Like it's just amazing to me. This should be simple.
Yeah, for real. And you know what? That would actually be a really good spot to wrap it up. But I did have one more question for you, and I don't think it'll take you much time, because it goes back to earlier and you talking about your transition from senior pastor to missions pastor. I don't think I've had you work this yet on this podcast before, but I also have a terrible memory, so whatever. Here we go. Yeah. You've had this thing that you've told me before that you call it your like personal heresy or something, which is silly. It's tongue in cheek, but the seasons of life thing. The 20, 30, 50. Yeah. I'd love for you to work that. But I think it's interesting. The reason why, the lead up to that is you spent 14 years in Albania. And then oddly enough, 14 years as lead pastor of FBC. That's very ironic. Exactly 14. So, and that's 28
That's
together.
Actually not true.
Are you working the sevens?
No, that's not exactly true. So the truth be told, I was only a senior pastor here for 12 and a half.
12? Okay. All right. Well, there you go.
Yeah. So I lived a couple, 2.5
so you can't
in
say
Atlanta,
14 and
kind
14,
of in between.
Then.
No,
so you've been back.
Exactly.
Okay, I got you. Well, that's fine. That's fine. But anyway, so you've got this little thing that you get from the scriptures, of course. Could you summarize the seasons of life thing in regards to ministry? And then I'm curious if that has any... Or if you have any conclusions about what your role in ministry now is. You've already kind of alluded to it, but just not in regards to FBC as a church, but in regards to you and the life that you've got left. What is your role in ministry now?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so very briefly, without any notes in front of me, I think that when you view, like you take the long view, you step back and you look at the panorama of, what is a man's life? Mm-hmm. And so, Psalm 90, verse 10, 70 and 10, and if by reason of strength, 80. So a typical lifespan is between 70 and 80 years, and that is borne out by statistics of typical lifespans. It was the case back when that was written. It's the case, even now, thousands of years later. The Bible basically refers to a person, is not referred to as a man until he's 20. Mm-hmm. So you're basically a child until you're 20. Don't get all upset with me. I'm just using an Israeli comparison.
Okay. I was going to say Hebrew.
Yeah, the Israeli comparison is the idea that when a man is numbered as a man, when he's old enough to go to war, and that was numbered at age 20. I'm not trying to draw a hard law for everybody, but anyways. Right,
but military service was 20. And
we're taking a very broad... Yes, we're taking a very broad brush view here. Mm-hmm. So all I'm trying to say is the first 20 years of your life, you're a kid, you're growing up, you're figuring it out.
You're learning.
Don't get mad at me, teenagers.
Your brain
relax.
Isn't done growing yet. What's biology?
You're figuring it out. You're learning life. You're just growing up. You don't have a ton of responsibility. Somebody else takes care of you. Sure. So, thank the Lord for that. And then when you're 20, it's time for you to start to be a man and figure out what it is you're going to do. And so what you're going to find is that what I have observed in life over and over and over, I ask people all the time.
So you're comparing the life testimonies with Bible principles that you're seeing. Yeah.
Right. So there's some loose Bible principles and then an overwhelming amount of practical reinforcement just I've observed in my years. So in your 20s, if you got saved as a kid, if you got saved before you're 20 or around 20, if you got saved young enough in life, in your 20s is the decade of training. That's the decade for you to grow up and figure out what you believe, why you believe it, what your life's going to be all about. So you spend your entire decade of your 20s, more or less, figuring out who you are in Christ and what you want to do for Christ. Mm-hmm. Then from 30 to 50, I consider to be the 20 most productive adult years of your life. Because, and there's something about 30, Jesus didn't start his earthly ministry until he was 30. He was baptized at 30. He was led of the Spirit into the wilderness. He was tempted of the devil, and he began immediately then his earthly ministry. Why? Was Jesus not ready at 25? No, of course not. There's something more to that. You go back to the Old Testament and the Levitical priesthood, and they served in the temple from 30 to 50. That's when they served in the service of the Lord. And so again, this isn't a law. This is just a principle. So interestingly, with that, I've just asked guys, when you got guys who are in vocational ministry, tell me when you got started. Over and over and over and over again. And it's what happened with you. Like, you were preparing, bugging me from the time you were 20, 21, 22, 23. Hey, what about this? What about that? But as it turns out, the natural course of your preparation led you to actually relocate when you were 30.
Yeah.
Like, it's
29
I was 30.
and 11 months.
Well, there you go. You beat the curve, bro. Good for you.
Got him.
Okay, so I was 30. Like, it just happens over and over and over again. Okay,
and it doesn't mean that you don't serve in ministry before. Like, I was actually on staff as a pastor at FBC when I was 25. But you're still learning. You're still learning.
But but listen, the defining ministry for your life is right not now. Youth pastor at FBC. Right. It's hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is. The defining ministry for my life is not even First Baptist Church.
Was it middle school?
It's Albania.
Ministry? Yeah.
Oh, it's Albania. To this day, it's Albania.
Well, both,
like, I do what I do.
Albania and FBC. I mean.
Yes.
Like, it's
I
not
was
20
there
to
for
30 to 50 hard lines, like, give or take a few years. Yeah.
So when I left Albania, I was 45.
Okay. So you were getting towards the end, closer to 50.
I was getting towards the end of that of that curve. Anyway, so then just get back to my little overview, and I don't want to drag this out. So those are your why? Because I think that when you're 30, you're old enough to not be a kid, not be impetuous, not be foolish.
You've learned enough.
But you're young enough to still have a ton of energy.
Sure.
Like, let me tell you something. If I had to sign up and do what you're doing today, it would just be really hard, because I'm old and I get tired really fast. Like, it takes a ton of energy to start a new ministry in a new place, especially a foreign location. And you have to have that energy. From 30 to 50, you can pull that off. 50 to 70 is the next bracket. Where are you done? Of course you're not done.
Right.
So what's the role of somebody who is beyond that 20 years of productive, fruitful ministry? Well, in my opinion, the primary role becomes that of the mentor and the teacher. And the role of the mentor and teacher should primarily be to be pouring into the lives of the guys in their 20s, not 30 to 50, because the 30 to 50 guys are out there doing what they're doing. Already. But the guys in their 20s who are learning need to be learning from guys who have done it from 30 to 50.
Sure.
And then can be taught what to look out for and what to emphasize and what's important and what's not important and that sort of thing. So a guy in their 20s who's serious can take that advice and really, point the boat in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I'm in that phase. I'm in the 50 to 70. Well, what about if you're over 70? Well, we'll just keep doing it. I mean, by reason of strength,
man, praise God.
Yeah, just keep doing it. Like, it's not a cap at 70. I'm just making broad statements. But I do find this to be the case. Like, and face it, when you get 80, or if, my mother passed away a little over a year ago, she was 93. Well, look, when you get into your 90s, face it, your cognitive responsibility is lower, your physical abilities are lower, your responses, I mean, everything about you, it's just harder, obviously. So, I mean, while you have the ability, then be always teaching, training, help. If you can't do it yourself, help somebody else go do it. Share the wisdom, because in this stage, from 50 to 70, a lot less energy.
Sure.
But hopefully a lot more wisdom.
Well, wisdom and time, though, because you don't have kids. So in that 30 to 50 range, not only are you out there plugging away doing the ministry, you're also raising a family. So it's like you have the least amount of time in the 30 to 50 range. Yeah.
But it's been fun asking people in vocational ministry, when'd you get your start? I challenge people, go ask people that story. You're going to hear
right around 28 to 32 or some
28 to 32, 29 to 30. Like, I'm telling you, it's going to be bracketed around 30. It just works out that way. Because it takes those years to kind of get ready. So that's kind of the theory.
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting too is it gives me, ever since I've heard you say that before, it gives me just vision for, like, okay, you're 31. you've got a good, if the Lord tarries, of course, we do think he's coming back soon. So that changes things. But if the Lord tarries, man, you've got a 20-year run right now where you're going to have the energy and the strength of a young man to really make an impact. And then, of course, it doesn't mean when you turn 50 that's over. But, now's the time to, take what you learned in your 20s and to go for it as hard as you can until you've got time.
Yep.
And then, if the Lord's still not back when you're in your 50s and you're slowing down, it's like, okay, now the emphasis changes more to preparing the next generation of guys to go. And I think that can give you a broad, zoomed out vision for your whole life and not just making sure you've got a job all of the time.
Yeah. And of course, this isn't to judge anybody else's choices, where they are in their age and what they're doing in their job description.
No,
God bless you. But this has been my observation. And I find that it not just works out in the broad, spectrum of God's servants. It just works for me. Mm-hmm. And I want to be in the role I'm in now because I find that I can be effective in this role.
Sure.
If I had the 30 to 50 role again, I could do it. If I had to, if I was tasked to go start over again, I wouldn't be afraid. Mm-hmm. I just know I wouldn't be as good at it as I used to.
Gotcha.
I just wouldn't. Sure. I don't have the energy. I'm older. I'm grumpier.
Or you need to take a young guy with you or something.
Yeah, now that would be different. And say, you do run all the errands and let me just tell you what to do. Okay, maybe, but that's different.
Right.
It's a different
like
role.
You said,
anyway.
It's not to say that there ain't guys in their 60s or early 70s still killing it as senior pastors and doing great. But
starting new works.
But they're also making sure that they're training and discipling the young guys because they know that they don't have forever. Of course, you're not guaranteed tomorrow. But anyway, I think that was a great conversation, man. We're at the time. Thanks again. That was great. Always good to talk to you and flip the mics on while we're doing it.
Yeah, that was my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Well, there you go, guys. Lots of good stuff there. Lots of little one-liners. Lots of good things about being self-aware of where you're at in ministry and not just dawdling along in your life and trying to keep a job or a position or a title, but really having a vision for how are you fulfilling the Great Commission, whether that's in the, at a certain time of your life and going out and doing it, or that's preparing for the mission, or you're in that later stage of life where not only are you doing the mission, but you're specifically and intentionally investing in the younger generation so that they can continue. That's how we keep this thing going until the Lord comes back. So hope you liked it. Hope you learned a lot. Until next time, God bless.
Thanks for listening. Please rate and subscribe and share us on social media. Also, please make sure to check out our other podcast, Theology Roundtable, at theologyroundtable.com.